It's when the love for a political individual marries with desperation. That's a really dangerous position to be in. And you have to hope that that person that has power, in some ways, is a benevolent person that wouldn't do those things, right? So, I've heard a lot of people make those same comments about Trump, but at the same time, I just don't see it. I don't see it because I think they make those comparisons to the late Roman Republic. But if you look at where we are as a country, I think we've ceased to be really a functional republic in a very long time. And I think we are more in an empire stage because if you even look at the executive office since FDR, the executive has become much more powerful than the other two branches of government. That was the part of the conversation on Order of Man I most wanted to land carefully. And we covered so much ground that I never fully developed it. Because I named the mechanism Desperation, and I named the inflection point FDR. But I never fully actually walked through the structural argument underneath. Why republics survive when their leaders give power back. Why they fail when their leaders don't. And why one specific custom established by one Roman farmer 2,500 years ago and maintained by one American general 200 years ago, was the load-bearing wall of every functional republic in history. When that custom breaks, the republic doesn't immediately collapse. It stops being a republic and starts being something else, gradually, while the language used to describe it stays the same. This is the pattern I want to finish here. How republics actually keep power lent rather than kept. Why it cost Rome when the custom broke. And why it cost America since the custom broke here as well. And why this, not any specific policy, any specific election, or any specific party, is the structural question that decides whether the American experiment continues or ends. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This is Hidden Forces in History. I'm the CEO of Command Your Brand, and you can find us at commandyourbrand.com. If you came here from Order of Man, welcome. Ryan and I covered a lot of ground. Rome, the 3rd century crisis, monetary debasement, 1913, the immigration question, attention spans, what the fall of America might actually look like. The Roman material will come from the conversation that lives on my sister channel, The Roman Pattern. The link's below. This video focuses on one specific thread we kept circling and never quite landed. The pattern by which republics keep themselves republican. And the specific custom America inherited from Rome, maintained for 144 years, and then quietly broke. Before I get into the framework, 3 corrections I owe you on the record. First, on Maximinus Thrax. I opened the conversation with the Thracian peasant who became emperor in 235 AD. The legend says he was 8 feet tall. The historical reality is he certainly was very tall by ancient standards, probably 6'5" to 6'8", like Aaron Judge. But 8 foot comes from the Historia Augusta, which is a late Roman source that mixes documented history with legend. The point I was making is that Rome at one point offered a pathway from absolute nobody to absolute power, and that holds. The exact height is folklore, not history. Second, on the silver coin debasement. I said Augustus's denarius was 95% pure silver, and it had fallen to 5% by Aurelian's reign in the 270s. The 95% figure of Augustus is correct. The Aurelian figure is actually generous. By his time, the standard coin silver content was closer to 3 to 4%. His predecessor Gallienus had already debased it below 5. The 300-year arc is accurate. The endpoint was worse than what I told you. Third, on FDR and the 2-term tradition. I referenced Washington stepping down after 2 terms as the model that FDR broke. To be precise, Washington's 2-term limit was a custom, not a law. He established it by refusing a 3rd term in 1796. Every president for the next 144 years voluntarily honored it, even when they were popular enough to win a 3rd term. Theodore Roosevelt ran again in 1912, specifically because he only served 1 election, plus the completion of McKinley's term. FDR was the first to break the custom directly, running for 4 terms between 1932 and 44, and winning all 4. The 22nd Amendment, which made the 2-term limit into law, wasn't ratified until 1951. 6 years after FDR's death. The custom had to be killed before the law existed to protect it. With those corrected, here's the framework. Every functional republic in history has been built on one load-bearing custom. Not a law, not a constitutional clause, a custom. The custom is this: leaders return power voluntarily. That sounds obvious until you realize how rare it is. Most leaders given enough power and enough time don't return it. They accumulate it. They consolidate it. They find reasons, usually genuine reasons, to extend their tenure beyond what was originally agreed. Crisis, continuity, the complexity of unfinished work, the desperate need to protect the gains already made being undone by successors who don't understand. The leaders who break the custom don't usually break it dramatically. They break it gradually, with public approval, often during a crisis the population genuinely fears. Republics that have this custom survive. Republics that lose it become something else. The transformation has run on roughly the same architecture in every documented case. Rome in the 1st century BC, France in the 1790s, and America in the 1930s. The 4-stage pattern is the same. Stage 1, a founding figure establishes the custom by personally embodying it. Cincinnatus in Rome, Washington in America. Stage 2, the custom holds for generations because it's perceived as load-bearing. Republics that maintain it remain functional. Stage 3, a genuine crisis appears, combined with a popular figure capable of resolving it. Love plus desperation. The custom is broken, usually with broad public support and good reasons. Stage 4, the structural expansion that occurred during the crisis becomes permanent. Subsequent leaders inherit the expanded office. The custom is formally restored, sometimes by law, like America's 22nd Amendment. But the underlying authority that accumulated during the breach never returns. Let me walk you through each stage. The Roman Republic was funded in 509 BC, after the expulsion of the last king, Tarquin the Proud. The new political class was so afraid of monarchy that they built the republic's entire constitutional structure around preventing it. 2 consuls instead of 1 king. 1-year terms, multiple veto points. But the Romans understood something that the structural design alone couldn't solve. Sometimes a republic genuinely needs unified command, a military crisis, a foreign invasion, a constitutional emergency. So they created the office of dictator, a single magistrate with full imperium for up to 6 months, after which the office was supposed to be returned to the people. The question was whether anyone would actually return it. Lucius Quintus Cincinnatus, a character that may be real or may be imagined, but the Romans held him in great esteem. He answered the question twice. In 458 BC, Rome was at war with the Aequi tribe, and a consular army had been surrounded. The Senate appointed Cincinnatus dictator. He was working on his farm at that time. The famous detail is that the senators found him plowing. He took the office, gathered the army, broke the encirclement, and defeated the Aequi in 16 days, and then resigned the dictatorship. He returned to his farm. He could have kept the office for the full 6 months. He could have used the prestige of his victory to expand his powers. He didn't. He went home. 20 years later, in 439 BC, he was called back at the age of 80 under another crisis, involving a populist faction threatening the Senate. Same outcome. He took the office, handled the crisis, resigned, and went home. Cincinnatus didn't make Roman republicanism by what he did. He made it by what he didn't do. He didn't keep the power. He didn't normalize the extension. He didn't establish a precedent for the office of dictator becoming permanent. That single act of voluntary return became the founding model of Roman political virtue. For the next 4 centuries, Roman dictators followed the Cincinnatus pattern. They took the office. They handled the crisis. They returned the power. Until Sulla broke the custom in 82 BC, and Caesar broke it permanently in 49 BC. And Augustus quietly built the empire underneath the language of restoration that followed. But for almost 4 centuries before that, the Republic worked, because the load-bearing custom held. The American founders studied Rome obsessively. They read Polybius on the Roman Constitution. They read Livy on Roman history. They read Cicero on Roman political theory. And they knew the Cincinnatus story very well. When the Continental Army officers, frustrated by Congress's failure to pay them after Yorktown, gathered at Newburgh in 1783 and asked Washington to consider seizing power, Washington's response was specific. He didn't lecture them on democratic principles. He read them a letter, took out his glasses, and said quietly that he had grown gray in the service and was now going blind. The officers wept. The conspiracy collapsed. That moment is recorded by every contemporary observer because everyone present understood what they had just witnessed. Washington had the army's loyalty. He had the country's exhaustion. He had the leverage to take whatever office he wanted, and he declined. When the news reached London, George III asked his American sources what Washington would do after winning the war. The answer was that Washington intended to retire to his farm at Mount Vernon. George III is reported to have said, "If he does that, he will be the greatest man in the world." Washington did it. He resigned his military commission in December 1783 and returned to Mount Vernon and resumed his civilian life. The Society of Cincinnati, founded in that same year by the Continental Army officers, took its name explicitly from the Roman model. Washington was its first president general. 6 years later, the Constitutional Convention drafted a presidency without term limits, partly because they knew Washington would be the first occupant, and they trusted him to set the precedent voluntarily. He served 2 terms. Published his farewell address in September 1796. The address is worth reading in full. Its most famous warning is against political parties, but its operational core is the announcement that he would not accept a 3rd term, despite being able to win one. He set the custom. Every president for the next 144 years voluntarily honored it. Jefferson refused a 3rd term, citing Washington's example. Madison refused. Monroe refused. Jackson refused, despite being aggressive about presidential power on every other dimension. Grant refused. Theodore Roosevelt refused initially. He didn't run in 1908 because he counted his 1st term, which was the completion of McKinley's assassination term, as one of his 2. When he ran again in 1912, his entire argument was he'd only served 1 elected term, plus a partial, and that he was honoring the spirit of the custom, not breaking it. The custom held even when individual presidents thought they could break it, even when their supporters wanted them to break it, even when crises seemed to justify breaking it. The American Republic operated as a republic for 144 years, partly because the Cincinnatus custom remained load-bearing. Then, the custom broke. Now the first clip.
That I've read on, including, America, like Roman Empire a little bit, Hawaiian cultures, there's always some sort of consolidation of power through the military, it seems like. And then once that's consolidated, then it's peace. But that consolidation did not come through peace. And it's the same individuals who are saying now we're peaceful are the ones who enacted all these problems in the first place to consolidate this power.
Well, and you could look at Napoleon as a great example of that, right? Like Napoleon comes after the French Revolution. They have this new republic. The office he receives is something called the first consul, which once again comes from the idea of what Rome was. And he gets to a certain point where he gets so much power to himself that he drops the facade and has himself crowned emperor. So it is very interesting that you get men in this position and they want to bring more power to themselves, which is why George Washington is so interesting, because our founding fathers would have studied the classics to a point. They would have understood these things and what had happened in history, right? And there's a character in Roman history that he may have existed, he may not have existed, but we don't know. His name's Cincinnatus, and he's seen kind of as the Roman ideal. Because as I mentioned, the Romans had this idea that though we have 2 consuls every year, if things aren't going so well, we have to have 1 person in charge. And that's where that office of dictator is. It would last 6 months and then it would expire. So Cincinnatus takes the office for 6 months, brings peace to Rome, and then goes back to farming. And that's why George Washington was very often called the American Cincinnatus, because he's the same idea. And he would have, there's during his time, there's societies of Cincinnatus and other things that really were enjoying what George Washington was doing. So he would have been aware of a lot of these things. That's stage 2 complete. The custom held. The republic remained a republic. The load-bearing wall stayed in place. In 1932, America was 4 years into the Great Depression. 25% unemployment. Industrial production at half its 1929 levels. Bank failures cascading across the country. Hoover had failed to stop the collapse. The system was producing genuine desperation in the population. Franklin D. Roosevelt won the 1932 election with 472 electoral votes to Hoover's 59. The country wanted change at scale that only a popular leader during a real crisis can deliver. This is the love plus desperation pattern in operation. Genuine popular affection for a specific political figure, combined with genuine crisis the figure promises to resolve. The combination is what allows the load-bearing custom to be broken with broad public support. Roosevelt expanded the executive office immediately. Hundreds of new agencies. The Works Progress Administration, the Civilian Conservation Corps, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the National Recovery Administration, Social Security, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Housing Administration, Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. Most of those agencies still exist today. Most of them were established by executive action, ratified later by Congress under enormous political pressure to support the popular president during the Depression. He won re-election in 1936 with 523 electoral votes, the largest landslide since Monroe in 1820. In 1940, with Europe at war and Britain alone against Germany, Roosevelt ran for a third term. He broke Washington's custom directly. There were objections. There was debate. There was a substantial faction of his own party that argued the two-term limit was load-bearing. The objections lost. The country was at war. The crisis was real. The love was real. The custom broke. He won 449 electoral votes. In 1944, he ran for a fourth term. He won 432 electoral votes. He died in April 1945, 3 months into his fourth term. The 22nd Amendment, formally limiting presidents to 2 terms, was ratified in February 1951, 6 years after Roosevelt's death. The custom had to be killed before the law existed to enforce it. But the law only covered the 2-term half of the custom. It didn't cover the office scope half. The executive branch that emerged from Roosevelt's 12 years was not the executive branch he inherited. It expanded into nearly every domain of American economic and social life. New agencies, new regulatory authority, new emergency powers, new direct relationships with citizenry that bypassed the states entirely. That expansion didn't reverse when Roosevelt died. The 22nd Amendment limited future presidents to 2 terms. It didn't limit them to Washington's executive scope. Every president who followed inherited the expanded office. The ratchet had clicked. The wall was breached. Now the second clip. I think we've ceased to be really a functional republic in a very long time, and I think we are more in an empire stage, because if you even look at the executive office since FDR, the executive has become much more powerful than the other 2 branches of government. So I think we've been in a position more, and you look at FDR, the number of times he's elected president, right? It was more of that position where desperation and the love for an individual create a situation like that. So I think to say we are a functional republic, though I'd love us to be, we haven't been such in a long time.
Well, okay, so I got a bunch of questions here. So, take Trump as a president. A very polarizing figure, right? Half of the country loves him, half of the country despises him, and there's no in between.
Stage 3 complete. The custom is broken. The structural expansion is locked in. What comes next isn't restoration, it's accumulation. The pattern from 1945 runs forward in one direction. Truman expanded the office further through the National Security Act of 1947, the modern intelligence apparatus, the Unified Department of Defense, the National Security Council. He intervened in Korea without formal declaration of war. Eisenhower presided over the expansion of the federal highway system and the institutional embedding of the military-industrial complex that he himself warned in his farewell address. Kennedy and Johnson expanded the office through Vietnam escalation under the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, Great Society programs, and the entrenchment of the administrative state in domains the founders never anticipated. Nixon expanded the office through the EPA, OSHA, and the regulatory architecture of the 1970s, then collapsed his own presidency through the abuses the expanded office made possible. Carter, Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush again, Obama, and the recent administrations, each one inherited the expanded office, used some of its powers, expanded a few more, and handed it off. The pattern isn't partisan. It runs across every administration of either party. Because the structural mechanism is not political, it's institutional. Each new crisis, economic, military, public health, technological, produces some expansion of exclusive authority that is genuinely useful for handling the crisis. When the crisis ends, the authority doesn't get returned. It stays in the office, available for the next president to use, expand, or repurpose. The administrative state that grew out of the New Deal now has roughly 2 million civilian employees. It writes the rules that govern most of daily American economic life. It outlasts every administration. It has its own institutional priorities, its own internal culture, its own preservation instincts. The president, nominally elected to lead this apparatus, in practice inherits a structure he didn't build and can't dismantle. He can redirect some agencies. He can replace some agency heads. He can issue executive orders that the courts will partially uphold. He cannot return the scope of the office that Washington occupied, because Washington's office doesn't exist anymore. The Cincinnatus custom, return the power voluntarily, was load-bearing not because of the time element alone. It was load-bearing because it limited what could accumulate during a single tenure or crisis. When the custom broke and accumulation extended across 12 years instead of 8, the office became something different. Subsequent term limits couldn't reverse what had already accumulated. That's the Ratchet, now the third clip. So emperors weren't living very long. You don't have them. If you look at Diocletian from 284 to 305, he rules for 20 years. That was pretty normal in the 1st century AD. It's not very normal in the 3rd century. So you're going to have emperors ruling for months, a few years, or even a couple weeks. So they don't have a very long time period to live. This is the pattern. 4 stages. Each one operates on the same load-bearing custom. Leaders return power voluntarily, and on what happens to be a republic when that custom holds versus when it breaks. Stage 1. A founding figure establishes the custom by personally embodying it. Though he wasn't the founder in Rome, Cincinnatus founded the custom, Washington in America. Stage 2. The custom holds for generations because the political class understands its load-bearing. Republics that maintain it remain functional. Rome ran the Cincinnatus custom for 350 years. America ran the Washington custom for 144 years. Stage 3. Love plus desperation breaks the custom. A genuine crisis combines with a popular figure capable of resolving it. The custom is broken with broad public approval. Caesar in 49 BC, FDR in 1940. The break feels justified at the time because the crisis is real and the figure is competent. Stage 4. The structural expansion that occurred during the breach becomes permanent. Subsequent leaders inherit the expanded office. The custom is sometimes formally restored. Augustus pretended to restore the Republic. America passed the 22nd Amendment. But the underlying authority that accumulated never returns. Each stage is downstream of the previous one. Each stage runs through the same 3 patterns that I usually talk about on this channel. Money, identity, and power. Money funds the executive expansion. Identity erodes the citizen base that could check it. Power accumulates in the office that survives any individual occupant. Once the country reaches stage 4, the question isn't whether the executive office still operates within a Republican constraint. It doesn't. The question is what the form of the next consolidation will be. Ryan asked me what the final nail in the coffin looks like. The honest answer is there isn't usually a single nail. It's a series of nails, each one justified at the time, none of them dramatic enough to mobilize opposition. What you can see clearly is whether the load-bearing custom still operates. Does the chief executive return power voluntarily, in scope as well as in tenure? Or does the office accumulate authority across administrations? Does the political class recognize the custom as load-bearing? Or does each new crisis produce another exception that gets absorbed permanently? Does the population understand that expanded executive is a different kind of office than the founders designed? Or has the expanded office become so normalized the scope is no longer politically visible? On all 3 questions, the American answer is structural. The office accumulates. The class doesn't recognize the custom as load-bearing. The population doesn't see the expansion because the expansion is older than most living voters. That's stage 4 operating in the present tense. The Roman parallel suggests one specific thing about what happens after stage 4. When the load-bearing custom breaks completely, the Republic doesn't return. Augustus's institutional architecture lasted 3 centuries. The Western Empire technically continued until 476 AD. The forms of the Roman Republic, Senate, consuls, and religious offices, survived even longer. But after 27 BC, Rome was an empire wearing republican clothes. The clothing didn't change what was operating underneath. The American version is younger by historical standards. The custom broke in 1940. The 22nd Amendment imposed a partial repair in 1951. That Ratchet, it's been running for 85 years. Whether what comes next is permanent depends on whether the load-bearing custom can be rebuilt. Not the term limit part. That's already law. The voluntary part. The understanding that the office should leave each administration smaller than it found it, not larger. Historical precedent for the rebuilding is rare. This is the pattern. Republics survive when their leaders give back power. They become something else when their leaders don't. Cincinnatus established the pattern. Washington maintained it. FDR broke it during a real crisis with broad public support. Every president since inherited the office his break created, expanded it further, and handed it on. The 22nd Amendment fixed the term limit half of the custom. It didn't touch the office scope half. The expanded executive is now load-bearing in a different way. Load-bearing for the administrative state rather than for the republic. That's where the ledger sits. Plato wrote that democracies degenerate into tyrannies because the population eventually trades freedom for order. The American framers tried to interrupt the cycle by building a republic with structural checks and an executive limited by custom. The structural checks weakened in 1913. The executive custom broke in 1940. The cycle, it's running again. Same playbook, different century. Same result, unless the custom gets rebuilt. I'm Jeremy Ryan Slate. This has been Hidden Forces in History. I'll see you Wednesday.